Hello, hello, hello. Today is Thursday. It is November 20th. We got one more week till Thanksgiving. I'm Dr. Tangi. It is time for another session of Let's Talk Power Live. What are you thankful for? I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to travel abroad last week to attend a wonderful ceremony for a group of young men who are celebrating a young chapter of Omega Sci-Fi, and they were celebrating their Achievement Week. If you know the history of Black History Month, then you understand that Achievement Week is grounded in the very history of that organization. So I had the opportunity to travel there because my husband was a speaker in their Achievement Week ceremonies, and it was it was a wonderful experience. And then we got to meet a young man where we learned the economic history of slavery in the city of London in London. So that's what I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for learning. I'm grateful for safe travels. And I'm grateful to be back here talking with you live. I know last week we had a recorded session because we were actually in the air at the time, but I'm grateful to be back here live. And I'm going to ask you, as we prepare for Thanksgiving, even with its wrought history, and the history is wrought because of the way it was communicated, because it was taught incomplete, it was taught inaccurately, but we can still take time to be thankful for something. So I'm going to ask you, what are you thankful for? Always take time to be thankful. And we're going to get started today. We're going to do some talking today. I had something planned, but the ground in education is always shifting. So we're going to pivot. So we're going to go ahead and do a pivot today. I'm going to show you what we've been talking about, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about it. So today it was supposed to be, this is your brain on power, where we were going to really dig into the physiological impact of power on the brain. And we will get back to that topic, but I wanted to take some time today to really walk us through some pretty significant changes that are happening to the Department of Education. November the 18th, the Secretary of Education announced some significant changes to the department. Basically, what those changes are going to do are going to achieve the goal of dismantling the Department of Education as we know it today. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, I talk about power in education. Why do I talk about power in education? I talk about power in education because power in education is a real thing. Oh, but wait, before I go any further, I want to ask you, have you subscribed to this channel? As far as I know, this is the only channel where we're literally talking about the dynamics of power in real ways and how it impacts teaching, learning, and leading in education. We talk about other industries as well, but I focus right now, today, in this moment, on how power and the use of power, how adults use power impacts learning opportunity and teaching structures, how it structures environments, and what we can do to dismantle and disrupt and redirect the negative uses of power and get into what we all say we want. We all say we want an education system where every child is seen, heard, and valued. And yet our systems don't always operate that way. So that's why I talk about power. And so let me read this quote to you. I've been sharing this quote for weeks now. And the quote is simply this: education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power. The control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. That is why I talk about power. Whenever someone has the given authority to direct and determine what another person can learn, that is powerful and it is empowering. And sometimes we don't use that power in ways that are helpful and useful. And then I came with the book based upon my studies, based upon my research about power as an instructional force, how it shapes, again, access to or constraints to education. So here is what educational instructional power really is all about. Understanding instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. So what do we mean by afford? People always say, Dr. Marshall, why do you say the word afford? One, I like the way it sounds, but better than that, when you afford, that means you are giving the access to. And when you constrain, you hold it back. I'm actually here working where I am because my background is different. I'm actually working with a school district in Massachusetts lately, and learned today about an educator who has been removing a student from their classroom because the child said something that the teacher did not like, and then the teacher was accused of calling the child an inappropriate name. So in that battle between I don't like her, she doesn't like me, the educator is constraining the student's access to a quality education because they are removing the child from the learning environment every single day, 70 minutes every single day in a core class. So 70 times 5 is 35, right? 750. So 350 minutes every week of constrained learning. That's powerful because that educator, that leader in the classroom is making the decision that the student, the child, is not going to be part of that learning environment. That's why I talk about power all the time. Here's the other thing. I ask for the subscribe, like, and share. Please do that. But importantly, go ahead and get a copy of this book where I break down what instructional power looks like, feels like, sounds like in the classroom when it is building agency, when it is leading towards empowerment, and when it is disenfranchising and power protecting. I will say, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it will not go back. That is why I talk about power. So in case you missed it, October didn't break you because you're still here. You're still tuning in, and I thank you for that. We learned that in October, we really wanted to get you through those pivoting points, right? It didn't have to break you. Leadership needs to ensure that their structures are tight, that there's clear communication, and that we are on the path of ensuring that agency building is happening in a specific and structured way, right? We learn that leaders need to lead deeply. We learn that control will lead to compliance, but it will not give you the results you want in the long term. So we really leaned into that. And the November, our focus for November is really on really getting you to when power leaks, right? Because sometimes we have leaks in our power. So it was the first week about like power leaks, and we went over that. Go ahead and catch those replays. And then we spent the last week, you had a treat. You heard from Ashley Cuthbertson and her music as a vehicle. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll get a copy of her book and seek her out. We're supposed to be talking about creative practices and what your brain is really going through, but we're pivoting this week. Like I said earlier, we are pivoting this week because of the decisions that were made in 2 days ago, November 18th, right? So maybe that's when all the big news began to happen, but this is what's going on. So I want to share a couple of things, and I don't know how long you've been following. If you are catching us on the replay, fantastic. If you're catching us live, let me know that you're here live. But back in April, we started really talking about what was going to happen. We began breaking down what it was called the Senate Bill 5384. And we began talking back then about what was going to happen should the Department of Education be dismantled. And we held this series, we held a series of webinars, and we talked about dismantling the silent curriculum and navigating the space. And here's what we said we knew was going to happen, right? That federal oversight might disappear. And we said that civil rights protections could be weakened and that federal funding guardrails could shift to the states and that curriculum restrictions would escalate. That's what we began to discuss back in April. And we brought together leaders to really help them prepare for this time that was inevitable. And we have been on this journey. There has been a 40+ year journey to dismantle the Department of Education. Jimmy Carter signed the legislation to create the Department of Education. And almost from the nanosecond that he signed that directive, that bill, forces have been marshaling to dismantle it. There's a group of people who really do play the long game when it comes to getting what they want on a federal level. And they have played the long game, and they have found people who are willing to gut it from the inside out, right? The 40-year journey was all about what we talked about in April. It was about really shifting focus, the federal focus out of the federal government, taking protections away from vulnerable populations, students of color, students from the Indigenous Indian population, students with disabilities, gutting the ability to support educators with federal funding for teacher professional development. We keep saying that we are the most educated country in the world. And yet we keep siphoning money away from the very people who need it the most, right? They want to remove accountability systems and make it much more difficult to bring about civil rights complaints. The Department of Justice, right? There used to be everything used to be contained inside the Department of Education for ease of navigation from states, right? We have more than 10,000 districts in this country. That's a lot of school districts. And they would all have their work centralized through the Department of Education. Now, over this last 40 years, it really has become more and more difficult for states and districts to get the support that they need. And here we are. What we began to talk about in April was that this was coming. And, it quieted down a little bit, right? There were a whole lot of other events happening on the federal level. And the Department of Education conversations began to die down. It got very, very quiet. And we weren't hearing a lot about what was going on. Those very boisterous conversations that were happening back in April began not to happen. So I think it kind of lulled people into silence to believe that, maybe they won't do it. But here we are at a time when the very thing they said was going to happen actually did happen. So let's go ahead and really think through and talk about what's going on here. So right now, so the eliminating of the department, that's what the 5384 told us, that it was going to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education and that they would transfer civil rights oversight to the Department of Justice, that they would be converting all federal education programs into block grants, and that they would be weakening federal reporting. That's what the Senate Bill 5384 began to warn us about. And let's talk about what was at stake at that point. At that point, the reporting, when you take the reporting out of the Department of Education and move it into the Department of Justice, given our current federal government's penchant for not wanting to address the very real aspects of our nation's history and how that shows up in both overt and covert ways. It's making and was going to make reporting on civil rights very difficult. It's going to make it very hard. And that was the goal, right? So that's what's at stake. What else is at stake are the funding risks. Now, we know that the bulk of state funding, district funding, comes from their states. But there are percentages, about 3 to 5% of federal money goes, let me say it this way, I'll back up. At a state level, between 3 to 5% of their money that they use for districts comes from the federal government. So by and large, their money comes from themselves, basically. Taxes are the largest generator of their money. The challenge, though, is when you put all the federal money is earmarked for specific use. That's the funding risk, is because the dollars that the federal government gives to states must be used in a very specific way. Now, because these dollars are now going to be put together in one big lump sum, that is a challenge for how a state is going to disseminate that money. How are they going to determine to continue services, partnerships? What's going to happen? That's your funding risk, right? And then the instructional equity is an issue because of curricular challenges, because of the loss of disaggregation of data. That's the biggest tool. I was not a fan of the No Child Left Behind legislation by and large because of the over testing, but I'll tell you what I did appreciate. I appreciated knowing how different groups of students were performing relative to each other. Notice I did not say subgroups. Let me take a pause right now. If you're an educator listening to this, I challenge you to stop using the language of subgroups. Children are not subgroups. You can simply say groups. I was asked about a year ago, well, Dr. Marshall, if we don't say subgroups, what do we say? You call them a group. Inherent in the word subgroup is sub, which means under. It is a devaluing prefix, positionally, psychologically, socially. So I challenge you to please stop referring to groups of students who happen to be different racial, ethnic groups or disability groups as subgroups, because they're not the quote unquote norm. Just call them, we want to know how our groups of students are doing. All right, back to our show. Here we go. So the instructional equity, loss of disaggregation, loss of support for MLLs, that came out earlier in the summer, about a few months back too, right? So we're losing the support for our most vulnerable populations. That is what's at stake with these changes. So let's talk about what they're doing right now. They have 6 new quote unquote partnerships. The Department of Ed, ED means ed, the Department of Education and the Department of Labor. Think about that. They are going to get elementary and secondary education. So the work that was in DOE, that was handled in the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education, that's going to now go to Department of Labor. Same thing with the education partnerships for post-secondary. That's going also to the Department of Labor. The DOI, Department of the Interior, that is going to be Indian Education Partnership. Now, I spoke about all of these in April, but they did not, they would sort of were mulling around who was going to go where, how were things going to be divided up. This is now the official proposal on the table to divide the groups up in this way. So the Indian Education Partnership will go to the Department of the Interior, Health and Human Services, Foreign Medical Accreditation Partnerships, Health and Human Services. Child access means parents in school partnership. Now, parents have always had the ability to partner with their state departments of education, their local districts, their local schools, down to the classroom. Parents have always been able to advocate for what they do and what they don't want for their children. So this is about politics and not what is right for children. And then ed and state, the State Department, international education, foreign language studies partnerships. So all of these areas that were once part of a focused area, a focused department on education, where they had experts in these areas, experts with policy knowledge, with practice knowledge, right? People who were in the field, in the actual profession, would work in the Department of Education. People who understood what it meant to support a state, who had the answers. Everything now is being dispersed. Back in April, we talked about the dollars. So the two biggest dollar buckets are, there's about $18 billion. And then that's the titles programs. And then there is about $15 billion in IDEA. All of that money now is being dispersed and is going in other places. So when we talk about what's at stake, we're talking about the funding aspects of what's really going to impact how states now allocate their funds. How will the state leader, right, a secretary of state, a secretary of education for a state, how will that person be meeting with the various heads of departments in their state to really think through how to support their districts? How will they make sure that there is funding continuation? How are they going to make sure that there's service continuation? There's some real serious questions that have to be answered that a Secretary of Education at the state level has to be sure that he or she is ready to answer. So these are the 6 new areas that are being changed, how the department is going to be sliced up like a pie. Let me run through them again. So the elementary and secondary education and post-secondary education, those are all going to the Department of Labor. Then we have Indian education, that is going to the Department of the Interior. Then we have the Health and Human Services. You're going to have foreign medical assistance and child care access going to the Department of Health and Human Services. And then the State Department will handle an international foreign language studies program. I am concerned, and I'm sure that you are too. So what is the power move? If you are a leader at the state level, you've got some real work to do, and you got to do that work now. And if you are a leader at the district level, you have some work here too, because you now have to think through what's going to happen with your service providing, right? How are you going to know who to send your people to when they need answers? What's going to be the policy implications for you? How will you continue to get the data you need from the various groups of students to ensure every student still gets the excellent education they deserve. That was one of the best things about the No Child Left Behind legislation. It forced us as a country to look at the truth that we were systematically undereducating entire populations of students. So here are the moves to make. You need funding and resource power move. You need accountability and oversight. That's going to get you to your assessments, your disaggregation of data. You still need to disaggregate your data. You still need to know how much pot you're going to get. How will you continue services? The communication and messaging, that is as critical as anything. People are hearing all kinds of information from all kinds of sources and resources. So therefore, as a leader at the state and district level, your communication and your messaging are critical. You have to have a strategy. And then your service continuity and access. How will you ensure that services your students need continue? The question is, do you have a plan? Have you been thinking about this back in April? Actually, it started before April, started in February, right? Started in February. Then it quieted down a little bit, came back in April. It's been quieting down. Then we learned about the service discontinuing for MLL students, for students who are multilingual learners. We heard about that funding, right? Now we're hearing about Title II funding being cut. Now here we have the full-on proposal to dismantle. And here's the thing that's going to happen. They're going to say, we're not necessarily eliminating it. We're just redistributing the parts. That's how they're going to do it. That's what they're proposing, to redistribute the parts. So these are the 4 areas that are necessary as a leader to be prepared for. And so let me give you a gem. I give you a gem every single week. This time, I really want you to take a look. We have federal shifts are here. Is your system ready? Why the preparing for possibilities and state readiness checks tools matter now? Why they matter now? There is a QR code right there for you. Scan that QR code or use the bit.ly link. It will take you to this tool. The shifts are here. You need to be prepared. Your students deserve for you to be prepared for this. So I want to tell you, we've got a lot going on in this country, and our students deserve for us as leaders to be prepared for this. So that's why we took time today to pivot. And that's why I decided to talk more specifically about these federal changes that are underway and help you as a leader at any level, particularly the state and district level, and to offer this tool, why it matters more than ever that you take the time and you consider these 4 buckets so that your state is prepared when these shifts happen, because it's just a matter of time. And the one thing you got to know, preparation equals power. This change is about power through the political strong arming. So get ahead of the game. Go ahead and scan the QR code or type in the code and get access to this tool. And as you're thinking about next, there's a lot going on. As a leader, want to invite you to please go ahead and get a copy of this book, Understanding Your Instructional Power. Go ahead and get a copy. Then when you get your copy, go ahead and take a picture and tag us in your social media so we know. And in the meantime, please remember, like, subscribe, share. We know how algorithms work. We are growing this channel. It's just over 1.5 years old, but we are excited about being a channel committed to power and education in real and actionable ways. So go ahead, subscribe, like, share, get a copy of your book. Stay tuned. We have some surprises coming up. So looking forward to having you join us, and thank you. Next week will be Thanksgiving Day. We will probably have a recorded session Or we might take the week off. I'm not sure yet. But either way, the next time we hope you're here too. Have a great evening, everybody.